For our next speaker and final speaker, it's my great pleasure to introduce and welcome Gregory Zinman. Greg has received his doctorate in cinema studies from New York University, and he's currently a postdoctoral fellow here at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, where he is researching the Nam June Paik archive. As I mentioned, I'm looking to prepare an edition of Nam June's collected writings, and Greg will be collaborating with Edith and myself on what I think is going to be an extraordinary project. He's also writing a text on John O'Connor, his collected correspondence with Nam June that was gifted to the archive. John O'Connor was the New York Times TV critic. Very interesting dialogue between these two. And Greg is really doing important, essential research and writings on the histories of film and video, with a particular focus on the expanded forms of art practice that really challenge the materials and conventional ways of working with the moving image. A history that we are coming to understand is particularly innovative and prescient to our global digital media culture today. Greg has contributed to numerous journals and anthologies, and we're eagerly looking forward to his book, Handmade, The Moving Image into Artisanal Mode. It is through the work of Greg, as a new generation of scholar, that we are witnessing a fresh and new understanding of these multimedia precedents. Greg's talk, Analog Circuit Palettes, Cathode Ray Canvases, Nam June Paik's Intermedial painting. Greg.
Thank you very much for that introduction, John. Your enthusiasm for and support of my research is greatly appreciated. I also have to sub out laptops here. But I do want to thank all of you to take a Sunday, crisp spring day and come into a basement to discuss and look at experimental film and media. That really does my heart good. You're my kind of people. I also want to thank Laurel and Nona and everyone in the public program office for all of their hard work. This has been an event months in the making. And I would personally like to thank Christine Hennessy, Lynn Putney, and the respective staffs at the museum who have given me so much help in navigating the archive. And my research certainly would not be possible without them. Do we need?
I think so.
Let's see. Do you need power?
Yeah, I got it.
Is it going to work with that?
Oh, it's a mag. No, different form factor.
The fear and chaos that Stephen mentioned earlier, I think can just as easily apply to academics and curators dealing with PowerPoint presentations.
Remember slides?
Yes.
Yeah.
The all important power couplet. All right, so however long it takes to reboot.
There we go. I think. Don't want to.
Don't hit shut down.
Yeah. This is the wrong. Looks like the display is. Oh, wait, maybe it's okay now?
Right.
Okay.
It went into freak out mode because it was asleep.
Hmm.
That's a technical term, everybody. Freak out mode. See, it's still in freak out mode.
Is this isn't a different, right?
Form factor looks to be the same, but why not? Main display to VGA, main display to VGA.
Thank you for your patience.
Wake up. That's quite strange. We know it worked earlier. You should tell them that. We tested this.
Hey. Okay.
It's like somehow it dropped out of sharing the screen. Wrong button, wrong button. There it goes. Why it keeps killing this one, I have no idea. It's not recognizing my keyboard input. See?
Do you want to try the other jack? There's another one.
Give it a shot. Alright, still not recognizing any mouse or keyboard activity. This has been a day of this.
I think Nam June would have appreciated all of these difficulties. Yeah.
I'm just trying to get it to respond to my keyboard input. That's what I want to do. Well, I want to get the image right. It's amazing. Didn't do this when we tested it, did it?
This went fine during the AV check earlier.
It really did. I caught a fish this big. There's a mini display port and or lightning.
Do you want to just, would there be any purpose in just closing it?
Sure, we can give it a shot. I mean, it might
See.
jog it. Oh my goodness. This keeps popping out too. Come on.
Okay. What?
System failure.
Oh, we've had a system failure. Good.
Yep. Your computer restarted because of a problem. Press a key or wait a few minutes. Here it goes. Sorry about this. If you
So,
want
it's
to,
okay.
I can keep hammering on this.
There was a time I was giving a talk on Nam June Paik in Paris, and I put my presentation on a flash drive. And during the presentation, it froze the PC, it froze my PowerPoint, it shut down the entire audiovisual system of the college we were speaking, and I had to perform the rest of the talk. And I thought it was apropos. So if we can get this going, then we'll really be in business. Hey, hey. Welcome to 2013, everyone. Okay. I'd like to start my talk today with an epigraph from Nam June Paik. I still thought that television was a painter's job. Then, one morning, I woke up and said, why not make it my job, since nobody else is doing it? And what I'm going to try to do today in this talk is provide some answers as to the how and why that Nam June took up this painter's job. Recently, while conducting research in the Nam June Paik archive here at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, I came across an undated list of Paiks, likely from the early 1970s, of interim projects and byproducts. Among the numerous entries, each one fascinating, it was the second item that caught my eye. It read, quote, video realization of Scriabin's color organ part in his Prometheus, end quote. Paik's note refers to Russian composer Alexander Scriabin's 1910 composition, Prometheus, the Poem of Fire. Often credited as being the first multimedia artist, and later adopted by 60s counterculture as the first flower child, Scriabin long struggled to realize his dream of interweaving music and light play. And you can see here in the upper left corner that the first instrument in the score for Prometheus is luz, or light. The American premiere of Prometheus on March 20th, 1915, at New York's Carnegie Hall, called for a piano, orchestra, voice, and a clavier à lumière, or a color organ, in this case, a cremola, designed by lighting specialist Preston Miller and built by Arthur Moser. The cremola consisted of a ring of 12 lamps, specially made for Miller by General Electric, on a round wooden plate and connected to a switcher. An article in the April 1915 issue of Scientific American, titled Color Music, a New Art Created with the Aid of Science, reveals the degree to which these attempts to bridge media and mediums, much like Nam June Paik's work 60 years later, were reliant on the development of new technologies that would produce new modes of vision. So what I'll suggest today is that Paik's interest in reviving Scriabin's dream, a dream of making color abstractions in time via the manipulation of existing media forms and the creation of new ones, places him in an artistic continuum that spans centuries. It is a history of attempting to inject discrete mediums with the energy and form of another through the fabrication and exploration of new technologies. And here I'll briefly gloss this history, noting several artists of particular relevance to Paik before returning to his electronic artwork. One vector of this history is what's called visual music, the attempt to fuse the oral and visual so that one hears what one sees, or to produce new modes of vision that would tap into a universally felt rhythm. From Isaac Newton to Alexander Wallace Remington to Bishop Bainbridge to Lumia artist Thomas Wilfred, these artists devised their own devices to shape light and time. Now largely forgotten, Wilfred's Lumia compositions, as he called them, employed reflective mirrors, hand-painted glass discs, and bent pieces of metal, all housed in a screened wooden cabinet like a television called a clavilux to transform beams of light produced by a series of lamps and lenses. The clavilux player controls the desired hues and shapes via a piano-like keyboard. The results, as you can see, are slowly morphing apparitions of shifting form and vibrant color, an intermounting flame of smoky brilliance. Wilfred began honing his materials and techniques in the 1920s, and by the 1940s and 50s, his work was exhibited by the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Whitney, and MoMA. At times, Wilfred went to great rhetorical lengths to posit his work as a unique art of light, separate from visual music. At others, he situated his Lumia compositions as a technological expansion and extension of painting. Notably, he employed a musical vocabulary in naming his compositions, numbering them as opuses. As I will demonstrate, Paik's own practice similarly operated between media, and he repeatedly sought to establish and interrogate correspondences between artistic media and their conventions. And I'd like to keep playing this for you. It runs for over 369 days without repeating, so we'll have to carve out another time. We'll watch this. But I don't think it's mere coincidence, given this history of visual music, given Paik's inclinations, that he colored in the keys in this photograph from the catalog of his retrospective exhibition at the Whitney Museum of American Art in 1982. Now, the other vector of this history carries the energy of artists who sought to extend the possibilities of painting by injecting the element of time into what had previously been a static medium. By 1918, roughly the same time as Wilfred's earliest experiments with Lumia, the German painter Walter Ruttmann had moved from expressionism to full-blown abstraction and was prepared to abandon traditional easel painting entirely. As he told a friend who was admiring what was to be one of Ruttmann's last canvases, quote, "It makes no sense to paint anymore. This painting must be set in motion," end quote. The next year, Ruttmann laid out his own plan for using the technology of film to produce a new art, what he called, quote, "a medium of time that would occupy a middle ground between painting and music, end quote. Here, we see not only the proleptic desire for an art of intermedia avant la lettre, one that borrows from music and painting, among other art forms, but also one positioning the artist as a liminal figure straddling these diverse media. In place of easel painting, Ruttman proposed a technological art that matched, quote, the speed of our times, end quote, one that would mimic the pace set by the telegraph, express trains, stenography, photography, and printing presses via machine abstraction. Answering his own challenge, Ruttman devised and patented a unique paint-on-glass apparatus to realize his vision. Ruttman composed Lichtspiel Opus 1 by painting abstract shapes on layers of glass before hand-tinting and toning various sections of the film. The result was an 11-minute work in 3 movements, with gliding circles, cascading swirls, and rotating crescents filling the screen in full color. In April of 1921, Opus 1 became the first abstract film to be screened for the public. Other attempts to paint in time can be seen in the work of animators such as New Zealand polymath Len Lai, Scottish filmmaker Norman McLaren, American animator Mary Ellen Butte's experiment with cathode ray oscilloscopes in the 1950s, as well as in the painted films of Basque artist Jose Antonio Sistiaga and American avant-garde filmmaker Stan Brakhage, to name but a few, and there are many, many more. What I will argue is that this desire to create works operating between media that nevertheless retain their identity as unique art forms, from Wilfred to Ruttman to Paik, can be understood within a particular conception of intermedia. In 1966, Paik's friend and Fluxus colleague Dix Higgins coined the term intermedia to describe the dialectical interplay between media, which Higgins dubbed, quote, arbitrary, and classifications, quote, that have become merely puristic points of reference, end quote. Higgins' conception of intermedia is not the totalizing synthesis of the Gesamtkunstwerk, but rather a means of describing works that exist between accepted artistic practices. Intermedia works are hybrid rather than synthetic, and are marked by the aesthetic and philosophical tensions that result from the juxtaposition of their various techniques and materials, or by the recontextualizing of those materials between media. Higgins hoped that these new techniques and technologies in turn would foster radical and immediate forms of communication that would promote sociality and understanding. Paik's art, which combined and interrogated the normative use of myriad media forms and practices, provides us, I think, with an invitation to rethink the relationships between music, painting, and the moving image. So what I'd like to do in the remainder of my talk today is outline some of the ways that we can place Paik's multifaceted intermedial work in the context of these long-standing desires to make abstractions in time. And I will do so by examining the ways in which Paik employed a rhetoric of painting to explain his video art, by considering his thoughts on televisual color, by looking at how his own paintings explored the interrelations of media, and finally, by thinking about his utopian attempts to democratize art consumption and production. This analysis, in turn, will demonstrate how Paik provided a model for participatory art making that reconsidered media as a personal visual instrument accessible to all. While Paik is perhaps the most well-known video artist, he arrived at electronic media art, as we've heard earlier today, through an intense engagement with other art forms, including music, dance, and happenings. And I won't rehearse the biographical details, which we've already heard, but by the time he was invited in 1969 by WGBH Boston to participate in the first television broadcast of video-based art, a program called The Medium is the Medium, which I'll discuss in a little bit, Paik was already an established member of the international art world vanguard. In other words, he had already developed many of his ideas about art and television at the time of his earliest broadcast work. From the outset, Paik positioned his electronic art as an evolutionary step in the history of image making, one, echoing Ruttman, that was particularly well suited to the modern era, where an artist would utilize new tools to create new kinds of imagery. In an announcement for his show, electronic video recorder at the Café Au Go-Go in New York in October of 1965, Paik wrote a forward-thinking manifesto playing the role of Martin Luther for the electronic age, writing, quote, "As collage technique replaced oil paint, the cathode ray tube will replace the canvas. Someday artists will work with capacitors, resistors, and semiconductors as they work today with brushes, violins, and junk," end quote. What is noteworthy here is that video is not seen as a development of the moving image, be it cinema or television, but rather of painting. Unlike cinema or television, video's status as an art medium would be obvious and incontrovertible from the outset, expressed and elevated via indeterminism and variability, characteristics of contemporary classical music that Paik saw as, quote, undeveloped parameters in the optical arts, end quote. Indeed, Paik was convinced that painting's traditional possibilities had been exhausted, but could be renewed via technological means. As he told an interviewer in 1984, quote, "From Manet to Joseph Kosuth, people tried everything. After that, in painting's world, everything was done. You can only do that much within the limited styles of painting, from realistic to abstract to conceptual art. One way to move painting forward was to inject the element of time," end quote. I think here we can hear this desire in Paik's words to develop abstractions in time, paintings in time. And like Wilfred, like Ruttman, I believe it's possible to see in his statements not a wish to displace painting per se, but to use new tools to fulfill the medium's promise, to achieve new kinds of painting via new methods. And Paik accomplished this by rethinking the conventional use and reception of the televisual apparatus, transforming television from a reproductive medium that communicated from broadcast to viewer into a productive one that generated a feedback loop of information between artist and participant. He expanded upon his experience of mechanically transforming musical instruments, especially his prepared pianos, into the design and realization of visual instruments that could be played in the manner of the color organs I mentioned earlier to create moving image abstractions out of existing signals. Paik's investigations into the materiality of the television circuit spurred him to simultaneously situate his media art in relation to painting, while claiming a relationship to the real that vaulted over film's indexicality. That is to say, the relationship between moving image mediums and the objects and actions they putatively fix in space and time. He said, quote, "Film is chemicals. TV is electronics. There are something like 4 million phosphor dots on a 21-inch color television screen every second. It is just like Seurat. You mix them in your eye. In film, you take from reality. In TV, you produce reality. Real electronic color," end quote. As Paik pointed out elsewhere, electronic color was not a function of application, as it is with paint on a palette, but rather a function of time, a subcarrier wave subdivided into 7 phases of time representing the 7 color bars, an electrical circuit that opens and closes 21 million times per second. And what did producing real electronic color look like? To pick one piece among many, one that combined Paik's interest in music, painterly color, intervention into the machine, and indeterminacy, I turn to TV Crown. The piece enacts a social circuit between maker and receiver, generated by a kind of techne or craft, and here I'm thinking of Heidegger's conception of techne not as a practical performance of skill, but rather as a mode of knowing that engenders a bringing forth or a change in the object being worked upon, one that was in fact initially foreign to the nature of that object. The treated television piece was initially made in 1965 with a black and white television, and then remade in 1998 with a number of color televisions. Paik removed the deflection yoke that sends signals to the 3 guns that fire electrons onto the phosphorescent surface of the screen and removed the focusing coil. He then reattached the yoke on the side of the electron guns and added a companion coil from another television. Normally, video signals are sent through the yoke to the electron guns, but here, Paik replaced video with audio, connecting two analog audio frequency generators powered by an amplifier to the CRT circuits. The controls, which you can see here, allow operators to manipulate both the frequency of the signal, which changes the waveform of the resulting image on screen, as well as the attenuator, which determines the amplitude of the signal and subsequently the surface area of the imagery on screen. So while powered by audio signals, the piece is silent. TV Crown is also intended to be participatory or interactive. In other words, gallery visitors could come up and touch the controls and make new abstractions in time on screen. Now, I don't want to misspeak. You will not be able to do this when you see TV Crown in the galleries today. So please don't approach the piece and try to touch it. I'll get in a lot of trouble, and so will you. But to give you an idea of what this looks like, TV Crown then offers the movement of sound that transmutes the senses, so that the oral manifests as the visual via the haptic. Paik's manipulation of signals and circuits speaks to a deep knowledge of the properties and variabilities of the technology being used. The piece manages to retain the essential importance of the human touch in directly producing effects, but here the hand is mediated, so that the technological agent between hand and the material support moves from brush to the amplifier control, and from the fixity of a composition on celluloid or canvas to the indeterminate and immaterial play of shifting electrons on a phosphorescent screen. And this shift announces another mode of techne in TV Crown, one that stems from that centuries-old desire to visualize music that I mentioned earlier, as well as a decades-long desire to do so by televisual means. As he did in earlier television pieces utilizing audio signals, such as Cuba TV, which used a reel-to-reel tape machine, and Participation TV, in which participants could actually sing or speak or breathe into a microphone to create moving abstractions. Paik realizes a conceptual intervention into materiality on the level of electrical engineering to combine, as Ruttman and Wilfred had before him, craft with machine aesthetics in order to produce new plays of light and time. Paik here draws inspiration from his friend and mentor John Cage, whose 1938 manifesto, Credo, The Future of Music, called for, quote, photoelectric film and mechanical mediums for the synthetic production of music, end quote. Paik also incorporates Cage's ideas regarding chance, creating a work with a high degree of indeterminacy, setting parameters for his instrument's performance that is then executed by others. In addition, TV Crown addresses another Cagean hallmark, the relation of noise to silence. And you'll hear this when you're in the gallery watching TV Crown. Powered by audio, it's silent, but you hear everything around you. And we know this as a Cagean hallmark from 4 minutes and 33 seconds, which has already been mentioned today. In TV Crown, sound is both silent yet present, seen but not heard. Sound becomes variable, changing, and behavioral, responsive to the touch of the viewer/player. And I think it's worth pausing here to remember what a sound wave is. A dictionary definition says, quote, a disturbance or variation that transfers energy progressively from point to point in a medium, end quote. This definition, I think, animates several readings of TV Crown, both as a transfer of energy between signal and circuit, but also a transfer of energy between artist and participant, who shapes the image of the work according to the parameters determined by the artist. Furthermore, a consideration of Paik's use of sound waves as a disturbance strikes me as a key motif in understanding TV Crown. By encouraging viewers to participate in the manipulation of the signal in order to enact abstract images, Paik is intervening in the normative conventions of television reception and image making, from consumption to production. Indeed, Paik's persistent desire to rethink the use and mechanics of media in order to produce new imagery through manipulation of their constitutive parts can be seen as a precursor to today's glitch and data moshing video art. And here you see Corey Archangel's Beat the Champ. Just as Paik intervened into the mechanics of the televisual apparatus, Corey Archangel hacks a number of video game systems to produce a field of screens of bowling video games in which the electronic participants can only roll gutter balls. And I'm also thinking of artists like Takeshi Murata, the video game hackers Jody, and theorist practitioner Alexander Galloway's Radical Software group. Describing one of the group's self-playing video game consoles, Galloway explained, quote, "I wanted to do something in the same spirit as when Nam June Paik put the magnet on top of the TV," end quote. Following Paik's example, these artists also seek to purposefully disrupt and distort digital code to create new abstractions in time. Finally, Paik's rejection of the idea of a teleological progression towards media technologies' ever higher fidelity, the kind employed in military operations, surveillance, and other forms of hegemonic control, in favor of an art that instead, in his words, quote, questions the signal, end quote, productively destroys, and ultimately reorients our experiences by humanizing technology through dissent and provocation. By modeling the appropriation and unconventional use of television, Paik demonstrates the value in rejecting dominant media paradigms of use and reception, as well as the pleasure derived from actually taking literal control of media as a kind of personal visual instrument. If there is an indexical trace here, it is in Paik's insistence that the real is to be found in the recognition of the present moment as a production, both material and conscious, of the now. And Paik, in fact, extended the notion of a personal visual instrument through the development of his video synthesizer. And as we've heard earlier today, he began discussing this project as early as 1963 with engineer Shuya Abe, saying he wanted a piano-style keyboard capable of real-time editing. And that idea of a piano keyboard harkens back to the color organs that I started with today. The resulting machine reconfigured existing parts from other consoles into his 7-channel mixer and colorizer. The Paik Abe video synthesizer, as we heard earlier, had its public debut in 1970 during WGBH's 4-hour broadcast Video Commune, Beatles from Beginning to End. From its inception, Paik compared his creation to easel painting, writing that the Paik Abe video synthesizer, quote, will enable us to shape the TV screen canvas as precisely as Leonardo, as freely as Picasso, as colorfully as Renoir, as profoundly as Mondrian, as violently as Pollock, and as lyrically as Jasper Johns, end quote. In other words, the video synthesizer is legitimized by its ability to produce images within a circumscribed, historically understood paradigm of painting. By invoking centuries of painting and a wide variety of styles and mastery, however, Paik also makes the case for the video synthesizer as a capacious instrument that in the right hands might make images as powerful and arresting, and yes, even as masterful as any painting ever seen. Note, too, that Paik is less interested in situating video art as part of the avant-garde than in advocating for its malleability, its beauty, and perhaps most crucially, its accessibility. Paik's video synthesis was praised for its perceived tactility and use of color. Writing in 1982, art forum critic Bruce Kurtz described the intense colors bursting from the machine as, quote, transparent, luminous, highly saturated, warm, smooth, caressing color. Rather than being merely visual, it is color which massages the viewer, color composed of light projected at the viewer, with the viewer's skin becoming the surface of the color. Paik's synthesized images deal with a kind of color and surface unique to video, paralleling concurrent investigations into color and surface in the medium of Olitsky, Poons, and Bonnard, end quote. Paik is thus positioned not as a cool mechanistic technician, but rather as a sensualist, at once linked to Bonnard's pastels and Olitsky's airbrushed coats of many colors. He nevertheless remains an exemplary modernist in Kurtz's eyes, as his work represents a contemporary series of, quote, investigations into color and surface that are nevertheless unique to video, end quote. Paik wasn't content to create painterly video, however. He also once again rerouted the signal and brought video to painting. Here are his opus paintings, a series of 32 works measuring 8 by 10 inches each. I hope the title rings a bell here in that it provides an echo of both Ruttman's cinematic abstractions in Opus 1, as well as Wilfred's Lumia compositions as work of light and time occurring between mediums. As currently hung in the Smithsonian American Art Museum, these paintings fan out like notes on musical staff lines while exhibiting television screen-like shapes and thus serve as an intermedial combination of painting, music, and the televisual. While Paik was not alone in attempting to place television within the space of the painterly frame, he was able to extend his ideas regarding color indeterminacy and participation from screen to canvas. Although I've only begun to investigate Paik's paintings and works on paper, I want to briefly consider his fascinating series of canvases, numbering in the dozens, likely started in the mid-1980s, consisting of color bars. Here, video's color, as a function of time, is brought to stasis, a signal that has been frozen. The relationship between television's real electronic color and painting's applied color is conflated and confused, resulting in a representation of a quotidian abstraction that nevertheless reads as part homage to and part parody of the formal sensibilities and preoccupation with perception seen in the color field paintings of Morris Louis, Gene Davis, Ellsworth Kelly, and Paik was supposed to be the last one. In addition, these works place the television screen in dialogue with the familiar high modernist obsession with the flatness of the painted surface. Color bars, it's worth recalling, are utilitarian and serve several purposes. On the one hand, they're an instrument of calibration, a way to see that one's audiovisual media is behaving properly and displaying correctly, which we've experienced today, and ensuring that receiving stations and intermediary telecommunication providers can also adjust their equipment. Color bars are also typically used as a transmission before a broadcast, an indication of a signal to come that marks the subsequent images in terms of ownership, a signal, that is, that has been provided by a source. What then is Paik preparing us for? With these paintings, the source is the artist, and the viewing subject has become the apparatus. How should we adjust the sets that are our vision and our minds? These works are not merely meditations on color, but are paintings of anticipation, a play between the still and moving image, a signal announcing an arrival that never comes, except, that is, in our minds. And that, I think, is the point. These paintings are both provocation and a gauntlet, and it is up to us to provide the programming. In other words, these paintings represent another form of participation TV. I'd like to conclude today by identifying a final current of painting within Paik's electronic art. And this is his repeatedly expressed desire to democratize both access to and the production of art. For his contribution to The Medium is the Medium, electronic opera number 1, Paik combined a number of elements, including a couple of nude dancers, a dozen of his prepared televisions, multiple color video cameras, and other devices, into a heady audiovisual stew that mixed twisted images of Richard Nixon with Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata and frolicking hippies with segments wherein Paik instructs viewers to engage in yet another mode of participation television by closing their eyes instead of looking at the colorful chaos on screen. Paik explained his intentions in intermedial terms, invoking painting, music, traditional television, and even Thomas Wilfred's term, lumia, saying, quote, "What I'm aiming at with my Lissajous figures and other distortions is a television equivalent of Vivaldi or electronic compos. Lumia art will then become a permanent asset in the collections of millions of people. The silent TV station will simply be there, not intruding on other activities, and will be looked at exactly like a landscape or a beautiful bathing nude of Renoir. Normal TV bores you and makes you nervous. This soothes you. It's like a tranquilizer. Maybe you could call it video soma," end quote. Paik's is a vision of a genuinely populist art, one that anticipates the ubiquity of anodyne digital geometric abstractions such as screensavers and iTunes visualizers, which are also simply there. And while they have not yet been afforded the same cultural status, nor the fixity, as a, quote, beautiful bathing nude of Renoir. The ability to fashion such abstractions are increasingly in the hands of any computer or mobile phone user. For example, Brian Eno and Peter Chilver's generative visual music iPhone apps Bloom and Trope seem to be a fulfillment of Paik's dream of, quote, creating an electronic canvas and engendering a media environment where children, quote, grow up with a video synthesizer in every home. The goal, Paik said, was to humanize technology. It was a goal conceived in a Cold War milieu where technology had achieved the terrifying capability of ending all life on Earth. Access to art would result in a generation of media producers rather than consumers, and this shift would provide the salvation for all of humankind. This new art would be, in Paik's words, quote, without gravity, end quote, existing only as a signal, portable, mutable, and shareable. In a 1982 review of The Whitney Show, critic Robert Hughes said that Paik had altered the television so that it had become a field of, quote, pure play, electronic finger painting, end quote. This metaphor, perhaps not entirely intended as praise, has of course since become the reality of our current mediascape. And here, for example, we have David Hockney's iPad painting made with, yes, his fingers, real electronic finger painting. Paik's rhetoric is utopian, of course, and yet we also see a reiteration of Higgins' hope for Intermediate as a means of fostering new forms of social interaction and communication. In a 1986 profile of Paik, he was quoted as saying, quote, I want to see wall-to-wall TVs, have walls of illumination, gradually changing landscapes of pattern like electronic oceans, would be enveloping, comforting, very seductive, would make people desperately happy. I want to see that before I die. It must come. Nam June Paik made it so, and so it has. Thank you.